Or here, stand on yes. First of all, I want to thank you all for coming out on a Thursday at noon. It's a very impressive crowd, I can tell you. I know that Pierre is really getting people excited about politics again, and it's great to see.
Yay!
My name is Gail Shea, by the way. I'm the former MP from here.
Woo!
And I have worked with Pierre under the Stephen Harper government. I am the co-chair for Pierre's Atlantic campaign. I do want to recognize that we have Barry Balsam here, who's our candidate of record in the last election. And we also have Logan McCollum with us as well, who is a past candidate. I just want to talk a little bit about memberships and why it's important that people hold memberships. Pierre needs every vote he can get to become the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada before he can become our Prime Minister and make the real change that he's talking about. So, it's a little bit frustrating when you can't use cash to buy anything anymore, but those things are done for security reasons. We can't have people buying a whole bunch of memberships for somebody else because that's illegal. So that's why you're asked to use either a check or a credit card, because then the party knows that it's you. So you can sign up back there if you haven't already. You have to be a member by June the 3rd. So particularly if you're paying by check, we'll have to get it in the mail ASAP. So if you can sign up today or shortly after today, that would be great. You will receive a mail-in ballot in the mail sometime midsummer, and there will be a date and very specific instructions when it has to be back to the party. So if there are any issues, find me on Facebook or find me somewhere, and I will certainly try to help you out. So it's my pleasure now to introduce our guest for today. Pierre is a son, he's a husband, he's a father, he's a friend to many, and he's a politician. He was born in Saskatchewan. He was raised in Alberta. He moved to Ontario. And what I've heard coming out of Newfoundland, where they had the biggest political gathering in 20 years, when Pierre was there a couple of days ago, he is being embraced by Atlantic Canada in big numbers. So with all of your help, this guy can be the next Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Poilievre.
We love you, Pierre! We love you!
Wow, thanks for that great island welcome. Wonderful to be back here in Atlantic Canada to enjoy the best hospitality in the world. Boy, I've been in Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, and I got to get back to New Brunswick as quickly as possible. I don't think I'm ever going to leave. Maybe I'll just stay out here.
Yeah.
Join us all there.
Stay with us!
Gail, of course, is a great friend of mine, but more than anything, a great champion of the people of Prince Edward Island. All her life, she's been fighting for the people here.
Woo!
Both provincially and federally, she served as a minister. She was known for her wisdom, but also for her grit and her backbone of steel. And when I first came to Prince Edward Island to visit her, she said, "We have to go and visit the seniors who built this country." Yeah, and she said, "We're going to go to a seniors home, and Pierre, you're going to be a big star." I said, "Oh, wow, that's exciting." So I walked up to a lady there, and I said, "Do you know who I am?" She said, "No, but if you ask the nurse, she'll tell you who you are." So it's good to be grounded once in a while. Gail also had to give some instruction on Parliament Hill when she got there. There was a Liberal minister in charge of the fisheries, and Gail was pounding her fist about the need to raise the individual quota for the fishermen, because they couldn't take enough fish out of the sea to make a living. And so she kept saying again, raise the individual quota, pass a law if you have to raise the individual quota. But to get to the point, she used the acronym IQ. And the Liberal minister didn't know what she was talking about. So he said, well, I'm sorry, I can't pass a law to raise someone's IQ. And Gail said, well, that's too bad, because you could pass it to raise the entire Liberal cabinet's IQ if that were possible. But you know, regardless of where I go across this country, the story's the same. I meet people whose families have been here for 300 years, and some who've just come in the last 300 days. But whatever reason, whatever time frame they came, it's always for the same reason. They want to take control of their lives and chart their own course, be masters of their own destinies, captains of their own ships. And that's why they come to this big, cold, frozen patch of land we call Canada, right? We didn't come here for the weather. We came here for the freedom. In fact, when my great-grandfather went from France to Saskatchewan, to what became a village called Leoville about 100 years ago, Wilfrid Laurier was Prime Minister. And someone asked him, what is Canada's nationality? Now, he couldn't answer as he would have if he were a European leader, because in Scotland they would have said Scottish, in France, French, England, English. But, of course, we were already so mixed up that you couldn't define us by any particular ethnicity. We had people from, we had the First Peoples, we had the Irish, the French, the Scots, the English. Many people were already arriving from Asia back then. So instead of defining us by ethnicity, he said, Canada is free and freedom is its nationality. And so it is today.
Yay! Woo-hoo!
But lately, people have not felt so free in this country, have they?
No.
Many feel like they've lost control of their lives. Whether it's the 14-year-old girl who was suffering depression after 2 years separated from sporting and social activities, or the gentleman who mortgaged his house to start a business only to have it shut down so many times he couldn't open it up again. Or maybe it's the hardworking and heroic truck driver who delivered our goods over the borders without a vaccine for 2 years and was called a hero, and then all of a sudden the Prime Minister said he was in danger of spreading a virus, even though he's alone all by himself in a truck all day, right?
Woo! That's right.
So many of these people I meet who are desperate to get their lives back, who want the chance to get on an airplane and fly and see a loved one. One lady I met was not able to visit her dying grandson for the last time before he passed away, and she had around her neck a necklace with a small metal case at the bottom containing a small piece of his remains that she asked me to look at and remember that she was not able to be there and still can't get on a plane to be there with her grieving children as they have laid to rest one of their own children. Ladies and gentlemen, this has gone too far. It is time to reinstate the medical freedoms of our people, and that is why I will fight tooth and nail to put an end to these vaccine mandates altogether. The stories I hear at these events where 40,000 people have RSVP'd to my events, the stories that I hear are incredible. People are just holding on by a thread. You know, I'll give you an example. In St. John's the other day, I met a man named Mark. And it wasn't what he said, it was what he was wearing. You can tell a lot about a man by the boots on his feet. And Mark's boots were wrapped in tape to cover up the holes. He can't replace his work boots, even though he works 60 or 70 hours a week as a welder, because he doesn't have enough money. He can't buy his own home, so he's living with his mother and his sister, even though he's in his 30s now. He can barely afford to gas up his vehicle to get to work because it's now $2.50 for a liter of diesel. He feels like he's lost control of his life. These are things that we used to take for granted: buying a home, filling up your truck, buying a pair of work boots so you don't break your toes when you're working with heavy metals. But these are the things that we've lost over the last several years. Why is this happening? Why are prices rising at the fastest rate in 30 years? Why have home prices doubled in 7 years? Well, it is government greed, in fact. The cost of government has driven up the cost of living. Inflationary deficits have sent more dollars chasing fewer goods, which always means higher prices. They've doubled the national debt in just 7 years, meaning Trudeau's added more debt than all former prime ministers combined. And he has printed much of that money to pay for it. On top of that, inflationary taxes make it more expensive for our businesses to make the goods and services. The more government spends, the more things cost. It's just inflation, isn't it?
That's right. That's right.
So what are we going to do about it? We're going to restore common sense to our money. We're going to let you take back control of your dollar. Let's start with the underlying cause, too much spending, chasing too few goods. I'm going to reverse Trudeau's $100 billion slush fund. We should fund our core services adequately and without cuts, but we don't need to stack another $100 billion of spending on top of it. Second, he's got a $35 billion infrastructure bank. Now, we need infrastructure, but we don't need another bank. What's the bank for? To provide loan guarantees to large construction companies so that if they go over budget, the taxpayer bails them out. I'm for the free market. If a company delivers on time, on budget, sure, they should make a profit. But if they go over budget, that's on them, not on taxpayers. So I'm going to ask the infrastructure. And we're going to save $1 billion by defunding the CBC. That always gets the loudest cheer. Dale, where are they? I don't see the CBC here today. They didn't get in. They didn't have a ticket, I guess, eh? Well, and you know what? We're going to run the finances the way you run yours. At home, when you bring in another dollar of spending, you find $1 of savings to pay for it. That's how businesses operate as well, not government. You know, the great economist Thomas Sowell said the number one rule of economics is scarcity. People always want more than there is to have. And the number one rule of politics is to ignore the number one rule of economics, right? Every creature in the universe, every microbe on the ground, bird in the trees, fish in the seas has to live with scarcity. They have to maximize the use of limited resources. Every creature has to do that except the politician, who just externalizes it onto the taxpayer or the future generations or the consumer with higher inflation. We're going to change that. We're going to force government to do what you do, which is to live within its means, to pass something called the pay-as-you-go law. They had this in the States in the 1990s, and it was very simple. You bring in an extra dollar of unbudgeted spending, you have to find $1 of savings to pay for it. And the Americans actually balanced their budget for the only time since I've been born when they had this law in place, paid off $400 billion of their debt, and as soon as Congress lapsed the law, they went right back into deficit, which proves politicians need to be disciplined by a strict law that controls their spending. You've been pinching your pennies for long enough. It's time that politicians started pinching their pennies.
That's right.
We're also going to get our central bank back to doing its traditional job. You know, the job of the central bank is to keep inflation at 2%. That's the one job. Well, they didn't do that job. It's now 6.8%, 3.5 times the target. And they did this by printing cash. You know, the central bank governor said he would be happy to provide Trudeau with $400 billion of new money. 1 in every $5 in the economy today was created in the last 2 years. That always leads to inflation. Why? Well, if you have an economy with 10 loaves of bread and $10, well, it's $1 a loaf. But if you double the number of dollars to 20, well, it's then $2 a loaf of bread. It's not complicated. It's the way it's always worked. And so that's why the money supply should not grow faster than the growth in the goods and services that money buys. Otherwise, you have inflation like we have today. And it's great if you're rich. If you own a multi-million dollar mansion, it goes up in price, then you're a lot wealthier. But if you're a working class guy like Mark, who can't afford a new pair of boots, your wages come under attack. It's a transfer of wealth from the have-nots to the have-yachts. That's what's happening right now, right? And it's because the central bank is serving the interests of the very rich, of big business and big government, rather than the consumer. Now, you know, I want to ask you a very simple question. If Mark the welder doesn't do his job, what happens to him? He gets fired, right? What happens to the waitress if she doesn't do her job? Right. The governor of the Bank of Canada had one job: keep inflation at 2%. And it's at 6.8%. So if it's good for the waitress and the welder, why is it that a big shot banker gets his job when he screws up and doesn't do what he's supposed to? Under my government, he will be fired and he will be replaced. We'll reinstate the low inflation mandate. I'll get the Auditor General the power to audit all the transactions of the central bank to make sure that they are in the public interest and that they are honoring that mandate. And finally, there's new talk of creating a central bank digital currency, which would have you deposit your money in a government bank account. How many of you trust the government with your bank deposits? Especially after the way they abused that power with the use of the Emergency Act, freezing people's bank accounts. Imagine if all of your transactions were potentially surveilled by the government, or if they could manipulate people's bank accounts based on politics, favoring this group over that, or this particular electoral interest right before an election, or helping one industry and hurting another industry, or just increasing the money supply in order to curry favor with a particular group driving up inflation, or just seizing your funds if you're against the government. All of these things would be a threat if the government took over our deposits. The only country that's actually done this so far is communist China. So let me be clear, a Poilievre government will ban the central bank from bringing in a digital currency. Instead of creating more money, we need to create more of what money buys, grow and catch more food, build more homes, and generate more Canadian energy, including oil and gas, right here in this country. If you think about it, back to my analogy, if you have $10 and 10 loaves of bread in the economy, instead of doubling the money, you double the number of loaves of bread to 20. Well, you'd have $10 and 20 loaves of bread. Well, it'd be 50 cents for each loaf of bread. The cost would actually go down, as it should. As technology and trade increase what we can produce and lower the overall cost, the savings should be passed on to the consumer. So how can we unleash the production of our Canadian economy? Well, get the gatekeepers out of the way. Right now, government gatekeepers stand in the way of providing ourselves with the basic necessities of life. For example, we have the fewest houses per capita of any G7 country, even though we have the most land to build on. Isn't that crazy? In Toronto, 1/4 of the cost of a house or more is actually government bureaucracy, red tape, and taxes. They prevent builders from building, they limit the supply, which means it drives up the price of housing. In Vancouver, $665,000 of every single house is just to pay for government regulation and taxes. That's why our young people can't afford homes. There are just not enough of them to live in. So how are we going to incentivize more home building? Well, I'm going to tie federal infrastructure money to the number of houses that actually get built, to incentivize municipal politicians to remove the bureaucracy, let builders build, and supply more housing for our young people. Furthermore, we're going to sell off 15% of the underutilized 37,000 federal buildings, many of which were underutilized before COVID. Yes. StatsCan has gone to a work from home model. They got empty buildings right across the country that could be converted into housing. We'll sell them off. We'll use the proceeds of the sale to reduce our deficit. And I can just, it just warms my heart to think of the beautiful families that will be pulling up in a U-Haul and moving their stuff in to their brand new condominiums in the newly vacated CBC headquarters. Yeah. In other words, print less money, build more houses. The same is true with our food. Our fishermen are constantly under siege by the DFO bureaucracy that delays their licenses, underfunds and underservices the small craft harbors, and fails to provide fishermen with the ability to provide for themselves and to create a living for themselves. We're also going to reduce the taxes on our fishermen and our farmers, including by axing the carbon tax for consumers altogether. This is something on which I disagree. Mr. Patrick Brown and Mr. Charest both support the carbon tax. Charest brought it in Quebec. Brown supported it when he was briefly Conservative leader in Ontario. In this country of ours, heating your home and driving to work is not a luxury. It is a necessity, and that is why I want the carbon tax.
That's right.
And we're going to produce more Canadian energy right here in this country, aren't we? Yes. Right.
That's
we have
right.
the ability to do it. Listen, we have the third biggest supply of oil on earth, and yet we're importing 130,000 barrels of overseas oil every day. Where are the protesters? They say they're against oil, but every day we have big tankers coming from the Middle East, pulling up to the shore in New Brunswick, and there's not a single environmental protester there standing in the way, even though that oil is proven to be more polluting and heavier emitting than the stuff that is produced here in Canada. It also sends dollars to foreign dictators. So here's the plan. We're going to repeal the anti-energy law, Bill C-69, so we can build projects in this country again. I'm going to personally approve Newfoundland's plan to increase its oil production by 400,000 barrels a day to displace all of the overseas oil we're bringing in over in New Brunswick. And within 5 years, we will ban dictator oil from our country altogether. It's not just oil, it's natural gas. We've got 1,300 trillion cubic feet of natural gas that we could be exporting to Asia to close down dirty coal-fired plants there. And BC is the closest point in North America to Asia. Newfoundland is the closest point in North America to Europe, and they have a plan to pipe natural gas from the Jandark offshore oil field over to a shipping vessel where it will be liquefied. Now, how do you liquefy a gas? Anybody know? You cool it down. That's right. And what do we have lots of in Canada? Cold weather, right? It's our most abundant natural resource. In fact, it got so cold last winter, Justin Trudeau was seen with his hands in his own pockets. But the Newfoundlanders are going to cool that gas down to negative 161 degrees Celsius, so it becomes a liquid that'll be put on a ship and sent over to Europe to break European dependence on Putin and turn those dollars for dictators into paychecks for our people on this side of the pond.
Right.
And then we're going to remove the gatekeepers that target law-abiding citizens in this country, right? Where we have law-abiding, licensed, trained, and tested hunters, farmers, and sport shooters who are proven to be no danger to anyone. They are vetted by the RCMP, and yet Trudeau wants to confiscate their hunting rifles and spend $1 billion to do it. This is insane when the Toronto City Police says that over 80% of the guns used in crime are actually brought illegally in by traffickers across the border. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going after the law-abiding hunters and farmers, as Jean Charest did when he brought in a gun registry in Quebec, and as Trudeau is doing now, I'm going to take that $1 billion and bolster our border to keep the gun smugglers out. I'm going to toughen our criminal justice system to put the gun criminals behind bars.
Right.
We're going to take back control of our democracy as well. This is going to be a free country where people are masters of their own destiny, where we collectively make our own decisions through our elected officials here in this country. And that is why I'm going to ban my ministers from participating in the World Economic Forum altogether. Remove the gatekeepers that stand in the way of our speech. Our Constitution, our Charter of Rights, guarantees the freedom of expression in this country. Free speech. In fact, Gail Shea, she called me a couple weeks ago. She said, "Pierre, do you believe in free speech?" I said, "Of course." She said, "How would you like to give one?" And that's how I ended up here today. Free speech is the lifeblood of our democracy, right? It's a right and it's not a privilege. The reality is that the government wants to concentrate more power over what we see and say. If human beings cannot be trusted to speak freely, then how can they be trusted to censor what other people say? Right? The irony is they act as though they're going to appoint some angels from above to regulate everything that is said so that it will be purified of any wrong statements. But reality is, we're all human. We're all going to make mistakes. Sometimes people will misstate the facts. In fact, many of the times the misinformation is actually spread by the government itself. We see it.
That's right. That's right.
And so the solution to that is to have an open clash of ideas and let the best facts win out in the end. Trudeau's got this bill, C-11, which would give the CRTC the power to control what shows up in your news feed. He also wants to bring in a digital safety commissioner who would be able to take down websites and censor what's online. And I'm not talking about criminal conduct. Things that are criminal are already criminal. If you commit a crime on the internet, you can be charged under the criminal code today. What he's talking about is preventing people from sharing their opinions and their information if it contrasts with the government with what the government wants you to see. Twitter actually wrote a memo to the government of Canada saying, if you go ahead with these policies, you will be alone with only 3 other countries on the world that do this. Communist China, North Korea, and Iran. I don't know about you, but that's not the company that I want to be keeping, right? Our Charter of Rights, Section 2B, gives us freedom of expression. 2B. As Shakespeare would say, to be or not to be. That is the question. Here's my answer. Yes, I will stand up for freedom of expression and I will repeal these censorship laws altogether.
God bless you, Pierre.
There always is a risk of misinformation out there. I was in North Bay, and a lady got up and started screaming at me in the middle of my speech. And she was hurling all kinds of falsehoods and things she'd seen on the internet. And then she started screaming at my wife, who happened to be there. And nobody screams at my wife. She's very tough. But we got through the speech. And then the lady came up to us in the photo line afterwards, and she started screaming again. Then she started screaming at my wife, and I thought, boy, this lady's really going to get it from Anna. But Anna was so calm, and she took her by the hands, and she looked her in the eyes, and she corrected every single factual misstatement, one by one. And after that was done, she pulled her aside and said, "Why are you so angry?" And the lady said, "Because I lost my 2 sons to fentanyl overdoses." Now, and she said, "I don't trust anybody anymore." Because fentanyl is a medically prescribed drug. So you can understand, whether you agree with this woman or not, why she might have been just a little bit hesitant when the government came along and told her she had to take a vaccine after her experience, her family's experience, with another medical treatment. Well, everybody has a story, and many of the people in this country are just hanging on by a thread. This lady told her story to my wife, and these 2 mothers held each other in the parking lot, bawling their eyes out for this woman's loss. When it was all over, I asked my wife, "Why is it that you were so gracious when this woman was so clearly aggressive?" And she said, "Because I looked her in the eye and I did not see hate or anger, I saw pain." This woman was suffering. And in a democracy, we don't crack down on citizens when they're suffering. We don't speak down to them. We stand and answer their questions, address their concerns, listen to what they say, correct any falsehoods, and reconcile in the end, the way those 2 mothers did. You see, because freedom actually unites. It's different than control. You can only have 100% control. So if one person has more control, another must have less. Whereas freedom is the opposite. If your neighbor gets more freedom, you don't get less, you get more too. If your Muslim friend gets more religious freedom, then you get, as a Christian or a Jew or a Sikh, will also have more religious freedom. Yes, that's right. If the immigrant doctor who comes here has the freedom to get a license and actually work as a doctor, you'll get the freedom to have a doctor, right? If the local small businessman gets the freedom from red tape, you'll probably get the freedom to buy his goods more affordably, and your teenager might get the freedom to work there as a summer job. One person's freedom is another person's freedom. There's enough for it to go around. It never runs out. That's why instead of divide and conquer, we should unite for freedom in this country. And that is my purpose. So in the words of the great Canadian Prime Minister John Diefenbaker, when he signed the Bill of Rights, he said, "I am a Canadian, a free Canadian. Free to speak without fear, free to stand for what I think right, free to oppose what I believe wrong, free to worship God in my own way, free to choose those who shall govern our country. It is this freedom I pledge to uphold for myself and for all of mankind." Thank you very much.
God bless you, Pierre. Thank you, everyone. So Pierre's going to be taking pictures with everyone who would want to or say hello.